The DHS secretary pays a visit to Panama, and the Amazon is on fire. We'll talk about it all on today's Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, thanks for watching the Hot Zone. The acting U.S. Homeland Security Secretary, Kevin McAleenan, recently visited our country, Panama, for 3 days, and during that time went on out to the same refugee camp in the Darien that we reported from back in April. So we're back in the camp at Penitas, and a new group has just arrived. This whole truckload is from India, and they're getting registered now, getting their biometrics taken, fingerprints, iris scan, things like that, photographs, getting checked against whatever databases the United States has. And yesterday there were only, when we left here, there was only about 85 people left in the camp, but they had about 300 or 400 show up this morning. And that's how it goes here. You can have days where there are, you know, everybody leaves, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's 500 people show up. And it all depends on that controlled flow program that Panama has instituted to try and manage the flow of people north into Costa Rica. Again, that's all controlled by Costa Rica, because Costa Rica is the one who says who's going to go and who's going to stay. So I'm going to go visit a little baby who was born in the camp right after her mother, his mother, finished that terrible journey. Can you imagine making that journey at 9 months pregnant? That's unbelievable. The place is still housing hundreds of migrants that survived that perilous border crossing through the Darien Gap that we've talked about so much on this show. And they're still coming, hundreds of people every week. Now, McAleenan was in Panama pushing for a safe third country agreement that would see Panama becoming a home for all these migrants that come in. And let me predict that's not really going to happen. Panama is already struggling with the weight of so many migrants, not just the ones coming through the Darien, but there are also hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans and Colombians that are here taking jobs from the locals, and it's starting to affect local politics. We got some pretty crazy people getting elected down here. The DHS secretary got briefed on the camp's operations while he was there, and he was able to see firsthand how bad the conditions are for those that are walking through the Darien Gap. He didn't interact with any of the migrants, and that's probably a good thing. They were mostly from Haiti and Cuba and Africa, along with Bangladesh and some other nations. He also avoided the journalists that were there. Now, Panama's already had more than 16,000 people cross the Darien Gap and enter illegally into their country this year. Now that it's the rainy season and that's in full swing, the numbers are dropping somewhat just because there are lots of places in there that are literally impassable when it's so muddy. A month ago, they had something like 75 Africans that got washed away in a flash flood, and they had to be rescued by the Panamanian Border Police, which is called Senafront. Many of the migrants who come through here that need medical attention end up at the hospital here in Metatí because it's the closest one to the migrant camp. But this place is already overstressed, and it doesn't have enough medical supplies even for the people who live here. And so the huge number of migrants is causing some friction between the residents and these migrants coming through the jungle. Now, many of them said they were unaware of McAleenan's visit, and when he arrived with the Panamanian security minister, Rolando Mirones, the migrants were in shock. They just sat around like wondering who this important person was, and none of them really knew who he was. The news has it that the buses that were carrying people from this camp to Costa Rica have been suspended for the time being. And that means an increasingly uncertain future for those who are stuck in Las Penitas and the other similar camps in Panama. For their part, the Panamanian authorities are not really saying why the buses stopped running, but the increasing difficulty of making it to the United States is causing some migrants to rethink their plans. Many here now say they'll try to find work in Mexico or someplace else, which shows that the Trump administration's efforts are really bearing fruit, even in the face of unbelievably fierce opposition back at home.
Actually, my destination is not the U.S. My destination is a safe haven where I can have peace and I can do something to help my family back home.
I left Cameroon because of war. I struggled to find my way into Nigeria by foot. Then I left from Nigeria. Find myself in the jungle. It wasn't easy there. It wasn't easy. Even right up to now, it has not been easy. We are still struggling to find our way to our destination.
Now, immigration wasn't the only reason that Macalinen came to Panama. I think it was probably the most important one, but he also met with government officials to address the drug and human trafficking problems and to try to bolster the relationship between the United States and the new Panamanian presidential administration of President Laurentino Cortizo.
This meeting of security and immigration ministers has become one of the most important engagements we have on security collaboration in the region. I appreciate the vision of Minister Degenhardt and Minister Pacheco for developing this group. It has become, again, a place where we talk about concrete solutions. Minister, that this is a regional challenge. The organizations and the criminal activity we're trying to confront crosses borders. It doesn't respect our national sovereignty, and the only way to address that effectively is by working together, not just for information sharing, as Minister Rivas pointed out, but for concrete operational actions, investigations, and interdictions.
He's supposed to be kind of a right-wing guy, but not sure. During the meetings, officials agreed to boost the migratory and border controls to help combat the human trafficking, and that's a really good thing. I mean, there's already a lot of cooperation between our two countries, but it normally happens like really behind the scenes. The U.S. shares a lot of intelligence with Panama, which allows them to confiscate hundreds of tons of cocaine and drugs and stuff like that headed for the United States. In the end of July, Costa Rican and Panamanian authorities busted a huge smuggling ring that was part of the reason why so many Africans come this way to get to the United States. They raided 36 locations near Costa Rica's borders and took down this massive smuggling enterprise, which was reportedly charging migrants between $7,000 and $20,000 per person to get them up to Mexico. Now, local authorities got the credit for those apprehensions, but you can be sure the U.S. had a lot to do with it. And obviously, there's much to be gained by both countries for the U.S. and Panama to work together on things like this. But asking Panama to take in thousands of illegal refugees on a permanent basis, yeah, that might be a bridge too far. Probably not going to happen. So the Amazon is on fire. If you haven't heard, then you probably haven't been paying attention because it's all over the mainstream media. The whole world seems to be up in arms over the fires, which celebrities and politicians are tweeting furiously about, saying things like, the lungs of our planet are on fire, and they're spouting lots of other false information. So I want to take a look at the truth of the matter right now. Now, first of all, yes, there are tens of thousands of fires burning now across the Amazon region. This is common for this time of year. It's a dry season down there, and today, this year's drier than usual. But how many more fires? Well, major news outlets are reporting this to be a record year for fires, and that's just simply not true. One reporter even said this was the most we've seen in 20,000 years. I'm not sure how he knew that. That's kind of a stretch. But Forbes had a really good article debunking some of the more egregious claims, so let's take a look at some of those. The Amazon is not really the lungs of the earth, according to some of the world's most respected scientists. It might contribute about 5% to the world's oxygen supply, not the 20% being claimed. One scientist believes the jungle might actually suck up as much oxygen as it produces through a process called respiration, in which the trees convert nutrients from the soil into energy. Now, the majority of fires we see right now in the region are not actual forest fires either. They're not the rainforest burning down. They're mostly farmers that are burning off their land to kill pests and keep the weeds back. It beats mowing. It's still bad, but it's not as bad as the virgin triple canopy forest running down. The number of fires is up significantly this year, depending on what you're comparing it with. If you're comparing it with last year, sure, but it's only up 7% from 10 years ago, or the 10-year average, and so that's not really the apocalypse. So what has changed? Well, I mean, there are fires happening all over the world right now. In Spain, 9,000 people had to be evacuated from raging fires on the Canary Islands. In Greece, where they've been fighting massive wildfires for months now, and there's fires in Bolivia. Over 1.8 million acres of the Amazon have burned there this year. There are fires in Turkey and Indonesia and Alaska and the western United States right now. So again, Why is everybody so upset about the fires in Brazil? What's different? The answer? Jair Bolsonaro. He was a right-wing president that was elected in Brazil last year. Many people call him the Trump of the tropics. And they're doing everything they can to attack him, just like they do Donald Trump. That's why they're not castigating Bolivia for its fires, because their president, Evo Morales, is an ardent socialist. The media didn't scream bloody murder years ago when the fires in Brazil were worse than they are now, records, because the president at that time was a leftist, who is now in prison, by the way, for corruption. So policies put in place under that president, Lula da Silva, mandated that farmers in the Amazon region have to keep 80% of their farms in forest. Now imagine being told you can only farm 20% of your farm. That's one reason the farmers overwhelmingly voted for Jair Bolsonaro. Now the media is acting like Bolsonaro is wholly responsible for the dry season in Brazil this year, even though he's only been in office for 9 months. Anybody that with a shred of logic can tell that's kind of ridiculous.
Okay, so stop right there for just a second. I want to show you a video from CNN that perfectly illustrates my point about how the media is really doing everything they can to change how you think about this rather than just give you the facts.
A direct line connecting what is happening now with this 60% increase and the rate of tree loss.
Yeah, it's Brazil is certainly undergoing a very interesting time right now, put it that way. First of all, as you mentioned, this huge accomplishment, really taking control of a continental-sized forest beginning in 2004 under President Lula. And many of those measures persist today. There's half of all the forest is protected in some way. The rate is still, if this current trend continues, only half of what it was up through 2005. So it's not as bad as it was then.
So stop right there. What he's saying is that things are actually better now than they were several years ago. That there's more forest that is protected. And so the big concern is what's happening that may threaten that. Does he talk about Bolsonaro? I don't think so. Watch this.
There's so many things in motion now that could further remove those measures that were put in place to keep the forest standing. Behind it, I'd say, is a very strong farm sector movement, which they were really hoping to get some incentives at the farm level for keeping their forest standing. If you're an Amazon farmer, you're supposed to, by law, have 80% of your property in forest. And that means it's worth less in the market because forested land is worth less than pasture or than soy fields. But those incentives didn't really materialize, at least at the scale that was anticipated. And that was part of Jair Bolsonaro's ride into power. He got a lot of votes from farmers, from the farm sector more generally. And this is a very powerful sector. It's about a quarter of the Brazilian economy.
So you hear that? What he's saying is that the fact that Lula da Silva essentially expropriated land without compensation. He told people, if you have 100 acres, you can only farm 28 acres, and we're not going to give you any compensation for the fact you can't farm that other 80 acres. And so the farmers are voting with their, their interests in mind, wanting Jair Bolsonaro to do something to either compensate them or give them the ability to make more money on their land. That is not Jair Bolsonaro setting fire to the Amazon. Absolutely not. Now, listen to what else he has to say.
I think what we're seeing is really the manifestation of an accumulated frustration over many years that forest conservation didn't really pay in the end.
So you hear that? He's not blaming it on Bolsonaro. He's actually saying that this is more the fault of Lula da Silva. But if you look at CNN's headline at the bottom of that video, what does it say? Environmental groups sound the alarm over Amazon destruction. They're trying to craft the narrative, and they're being very dishonest about it.
Yeah, but here's the thing, though. If you ask Brazil's president if he is to blame, he'll deny there's even a problem. He recently told a group of foreign journalists that he was convinced that the data is a lie, adding that the Amazon is ours, not yours. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion, not their own facts. How much damage to the environment can one man actually do here? And especially when there's a denial of reality.
So how much damage can one man actually do to the environment, especially when there's a denial of reality?
That this is a perfect example of how the mainstream media weaponizes the news to push their agenda. It's underhanded, it's dishonest, and it's really immoral. And you need to understand that they want to control how you think. But you're smarter than that because you watch The Hot Zone. So good for you. Now, go subscribe to the podcast so we can keep this thing going. Just go to patreon.com/hotzone and support us over there. You'll be privy to lots of extra things and videos and stuff, and you'll be able to tell your friends you're a stakeholder, not just a spectator. So I'm Chuck Holton. You've been watching The Hot Zone.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.